Hello and welcome back to the Daily Zen podcast. My name is Charlie Embler, creator of Daily Zen. It's been a while since I did one of these. Being honest, I was really busy and I kind of got bored with both writing and recording the podcast. I think it's important generally to take breaks with things that are things you do for fun. I don't really make money from Daily Zen, so I don't like to turn it into a chore or a job because that kind of takes the purpose out of it. So I apologize for the break, but now it's back for the time being. I thought I'd try something a little new and do this on YouTube instead of Apple Podcasts, so I don't have to set up the whole elaborate microphone rig and all of that stuff, because that's also kind of a chore. I'm at my office, so excuse the mess. I posted on Twitter asking for topic suggestions, and I just posted, so I got one, but it's extensive enough where I think can fill the whole time discussing it. Also, I decided that I'm going to start each one of these by rolling the I Ching. I don't know if you know what the I Ching is, but it's kind of like a Chinese ancient version of westernized astrology. It's a type of divination where you roll numbers. Basically, the numbers are associated with various sides of a coin, which add up to these different lines on a hexagram. So you do 6 rolls, basically, and each time you get a different line for the hexagram. And after 6, there's a shape, basically, that's created, and that shape corresponds to a number. In this book of changes, it's called the I Ching. And today I rolled 18, which happened coincidentally. I'm not a particularly superstitious person, but it happened to coincide with the topic that was suggested on Twitter. So I'll start by reading the hexagram, and then we'll move on to discussing the topic. The hexagram from the I Ching is number 18. It's called Ku, repairing the damage, and it goes like this. Winds sweep through the mountain valley. The superior person sweeps away corruption and stagnation by stirring up the people and strengthening their spirit. Supreme success. Before crossing to the far shore, consider the move for 3 days. After crossing, devote 3 days of hard labor to damage control. And then the analysis is, you are blessed with an opportunity to resuscitate that which others have abandoned as beyond repair. This ruin wasn't caused by evil intention, but by indifference to decay. Just by addressing yourself to the problem, you exhibit a new awareness, a fresh perspective. This is a time of recovery, renewal, regeneration. I was laughing because the opportunity to resuscitate that which is abandoned beyond repair definitely applies to this podcast. But the topic basically that was suggested on Twitter was from someone named JPC, and it was tips to balance concern for the environment, public institutions, etc., while not becoming angry. And so I think that applies pretty well to this particular hexagram, and I often find, if you roll the I Ching on a daily basis or a weekly basis, that it always kind of applies to whatever you're dealing with. It's sort of like astrology in that the prompts or the hexagrams are open-ended enough that you can find a way to glean some insight from any response you get. It doesn't have to be this sort of divine communication thing, but it can be if that's what you're into. So anyway, the wind sweeps through the mountain valley. Chaos kind of comes through the world in the way that the person who suggested this topic is describing. There's concern that we can have for all these different things, the environment, political situations, divisions between people, inequalities, war, the list is endless. And if we spent all of our time focusing on these things, we would make ourselves crazy and miserable. And a lot of people do. But I think it's important to remember that the way to combat these things is to step back a little bit and simplify the way that we approach good and evil in our own lives. I think people often think that because negative things are happening in the world, they're directly correlated to how they should feel on a day-to-day basis. And so someone spends all their time on the internet, on Twitter, reading about politics, participating in back and forth rabble debates and discussions, all the while putting themselves in a terrible mood, ignoring their responsibilities in their day-to-day lives, ignoring the work they have to do, probably being a little bit grumpy around the people that they're around, or judging the people they meet throughout the day on the premise of these abstract concepts that they're dwelling upon so much as a result of thinking about the world and the state of the world and political divisions or whatever. So following the I Ching and applying it to this idea, I think, well, we can reread a certain line. I guess I'll reread the whole thing because it really does apply very well. I'm almost shocked at how applicable it is. It's always kind of like that. You are blessed with an opportunity to resuscitate that which others have abandoned as beyond repair. This ruin wasn't caused by evil intention, but by indifference to decay. Just by addressing yourself to the problem, you exhibit a new awareness, a fresh perspective. This is a time of recovery, renewal, regeneration. So instead of viewing ourselves as cursed, as part of this doomed system or part of this doomed world, or getting really angsty about it, we can see our awareness of problems and our awareness of suffering and difficulty in both our own lives and in the macrocosm of the world as opportunities to resuscitate both ourselves and the world at large, collectively. The issue with humans, I think it's a choice whether or not you believe humans to be inherently evil or inherently preoccupied with themselves or whatever. But I tend to agree with this idea that a lot of the issues that we tend to view as the result of evil are caused not by conscious attempts to ruin the world or conscious attempts to harm other people, but either by indifference or by an attempt to adhere to an ideology so that, one thinks one's doing the right thing, all the while causing all these problems. I find that people who cling to either side of an extreme ideology tend to gravitate towards ideas that lend themselves to that sort of chaos and disruption of the natural balance of things. People who lean really far left or really far right, people who adhere really strongly to any one specific religious or ethnic or political ideology tend to push the scales further in each direction and sort of throw things off balance. So in Zen, we try to hold to the center, and that really does apply to everything. So if we can hold to the center, we can find a certain equanimity and view all of the craziness that is happening in the world not as a burden or a difficult, not as a burden or a challenge, but as a blessing, an opportunity. I guess it is sort of a challenge, but a positive challenge to resuscitate the part of ourselves that has fallen asleep, to awaken ourselves from our own indifference and our own slumber. And that doesn't mean everyone has to go out and become an activist or join a group or adhere to any sort of ideology stronger, because that pushes things further out of whack. I think the ultimate lesson and the ultimate way to confront the issues that plague the world without making ourselves miserable is to do so in the microcosm of our own lives, because most of us don't have influence beyond that small little sphere in which we live. I mean, even people who are famous don't have deep influence on the lives of other people outside of, these sort of surface level projections and proclamations that they make. And I think regular people have started to, because of the internet and because of mass media, misunderstand the nature of what it means to help or what it means to make things better. And the concept of virtue signaling has become popular on both the left and right to connote the people who go on Twitter and say, oh my God, this is so terrible, we need to do something about this. All the while, all they're doing is saying that. They're just, typing a few words. They could be copy-pasting something. It doesn't really require a lot of effort. So instead of signaling that we're going to be better to an abstract audience, it's kind of ironic given that I'm doing just that, but trying to actually be better in our day-to-day lives with the people that we're interacting with is the best place to start. Because once again, these problems aren't necessarily always caused by evil intention, but by indifference. And just by acknowledging the problem, like the I Ching says, we exhibit a new awareness, a fresh perspective. I like repeating this because I find it kind of helps it sink in more. And then those three crucial words: recovery, renewal, regeneration. So by acknowledging problems and then using them to awaken yourself and remember to be a kind person, remember to get up in the morning and feel grateful and feel invigorated and feel ready to confront whatever you have to confront, even if some of it sucks. That's the real power. I think that's where the strength to make the world a better place comes from. Not from pushing everything further into the abstract and pushing things further onto either side of the chaos scale, but just by focusing on what we have to focus on in the day-to-day and confronting each problem as it appears with a certain dignity and a certain calmness. It's very, I don't know if anyone who enjoys the Stoic writers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, they talk about that a lot. And I think it's no coincidence that they too were living in a society that was plagued by a lot of the same issues. I mean, one of the first advanced societies is the society that birthed the Stoics. And so the reason that they've had a resurgence among people in both, titans of business and then also people who are just interested in improving themselves on a base level is that there's a lot of parallels between the society that the Stoics were living in and the society that we're living in. The more advanced and the more progressive and the more complex that the society gets, the problems tend to become not necessarily more complex but more severe, and dealing with them is sort of feels like a life or death thing at a certain point because they seem so massive to each individual. Like just as a single person, thinking about the problems in the world is extremely overwhelming, and it tends to drive certain people into a state of paralysis or shock, which I think lends itself to the indifference that allows what we might call evil to continue to flourish. So stopping that cycle by not letting ourselves get paralyzed or overwhelmed, but instead stepping back and thinking about what we can do to make our own lives better, what we can do to make other people happier, to lend a very simple helping hand or to listen to someone when they need to share something, to be more receptive to the world instead of trying to force ourselves into the world is the most simple solution to the problem that we face when we worry about the world at large and what's happening in the world. First step I'd say is probably focusing on the real life instead of the virtual world. It's very easy to kind of just get lost in the internet and thinking about politics and thinking about religion and thinking about all of these concepts in the abstract virtual realm of the internet. It's kind of like living in a video game instead of living in real life. It feels real and it feels like you're achieving things and making strides and kind of crossing new ideological barriers, but then you go back to the real world, you realize, oh, things are just as I left them, I haven't grown in a real way, just in sort of this virtual, abstract way. And in Zen, there's a very constant tradition throughout all the different eras of Zen thought to not live too much in one's own head, to not believe too strictly in conceptual thought, because it's sort of, at a certain point, it helps us at the beginning understand the world better, but then at a certain point it distances us from the world and causes us to become delusional. And I do believe that it's delusional to make oneself upset on a personal level over the affairs of the world. It comes from a good place, but it makes more sense to use everything that could cause us sadness to use everything that could cause us sadness to confront ourselves and sort of wake up and see them as an opportunity and a jolt out of our paralysis. And yeah, just to focus on those three: recovery, renewal, regeneration. I like that idea. Not gonna yammer on and on. I think that was a good way to revisit this. I hope that that was somewhat interesting to you, and I hope that you will suggest topics on Twitter if you feel so inclined. This will not be available on the podcast store. I'm just gonna start putting them on YouTube and see how that goes. It seems to be the more prevalent platform these days. And you can find a link to the book that's coming out on Twitter. It's a 180-page interactive journal that was illustrated by a wonderful illustrator from Brooklyn named Iris Gottlieb. The words are by me. It's a interactive journal, so it's not all just like space to write. It's illustrations, prompts, quotes, Zen proverbs, little meditation guides, sort of stuff to jog you out of your usual thought processes and push you into a more reflective state, referring back to what we were just talking about. I think if you like Daily Zen, you'll like this book, because in order to write it, I drew on the past 10 years, kind of the most popular material that I've published over the past 10 years, and distilled that down into all of these different ideas, and then turned those ideas into journal prompts. So if you're a fan of Daily Zen, I think you'll be a fan of this book. It's published by Penguin, an umbrella. Penguin's the umbrella, and then the actual publisher is Tarcher Perigee, who is like their self-improvement focused publisher. And yeah, I need all the help I can get to sell it, because I want to leave a good impression so that I can write more books. So please consider purchasing it if you feel so inclined, and thank you for listening.